Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. I'm Bob Weeks. And with me this week, a very special guest. We've talked about her before on Wichita Liberty TV a couple times, I think, and we had to call her by her nom de plume at that time, the phenomenal blogger Gidget Southway from Johnson County with her blog Kansas GOP Insider. But recently she came out from under the covers, so to speak, and now we can call her by her real name, Danedri Herbert. So, Danedri, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Thank you for having me, Bob.
And you're down here in Wichita, I think, to host the Joseph Ashby show. You did that this morning.
Yes.
Was that a lot of fun?
Oh, it was really fun, and
Yeah.
and I was impressed by the callers from Wichita. There's a lot of really knowledgeable people out here who follow Kansas politics closely, so I think that's good.
Yeah, and Joseph, a lot of Joseph listeners are really in tune with the national scene as well. And I know there's Joseph is not exactly a Donald Trump fan, so that, and a lot of his listeners are, so that always generates a lot of trouble too.
I tried to kind of steer clear of that. I feel like now that we're into the general election, it's time to focus on who the worst candidate would be. And I think, in my mind, there's no question the worst candidate is Hillary Clinton. I haven't decided how I'm going to mark my own ballot, although I can say for certain, never Hillary. So.
Well, I don't know. Maybe Jill Stein of the Green Party might be worse than Hillary, or maybe not. I mean, it's. I'd have to look at their positions, but anyway, that is a problem. So, Danedri, you are up in Johnson County, which is, of course, northeastern Kansas, the suburban side of Kansas City.
Yes.
Cities like Olathe, Overland Park. People down here know those names. And you've been the news editor for quite a while. You were of the Gardner News. So that's a fairly rapidly growing part of Johnson County, isn't it?
Yes. So back in the mid-'90s, there were 4,000 people in Gardner, and now there's 20,000. It's kind of doubled every census. I think growth has slowed a little bit.
In general, Johnson County, I think it was in 2002 that Johnson County overtook Sedgwick County in population. Wichita is still by far the largest city.
Yes.
Although I recently was astonished to learn that Olathe is the second largest city, not Olathe, Overland Park, I'm sorry, is the second largest city, having it passed Kansas City and Topeka, and that's really amazing. So we're just not growing down here in Wichita, Danedri, like you guys are up in Johnson County.
Even in the suburbs and Andover or some of those places, are they
growing? Those
growing?
places may be growing, but it could be perhaps offset by declines in Wichita. But we just had it pretty tough down here. But anyway, you still are Gidget Southway.
Yeah.
You write as that,
Yes.
and you are one of the select group of writers on Kansas Memo, the new effort I started up to try to find a central place to share information about Kansas writers such as yourself, me, the Voice for Liberty, Tom Pappert, the Honest Media, and people like that. So how long have you done your blog, the Kansas GOP Insider?
5 years.
5 years. And why did you choose to be anonymous? Can you tell us that?
I honestly, I don't really know. Well, two things. One, I was writing for a newspaper and reporting, and as a reporter you get a lot of information that you can't necessarily put in print, and I tried not to overlap much. Like if I was writing as a reporter about it, I tried not to overlap on my blog. So there's really very, very, very little on my blog about Gardner or people from Gardner. Not because I don't know a lot about them and would like to say the things, but I was trying to kind of be fair to them. But at the same time, you're learning all kinds of background information about things going on in the county or at the state that there's no place to put them, and you can't necessarily get them on the record. And as you know, as a blogger, there's kind of some different rules. For a paper, number one, you got to get your publisher to sign off on anything, and which requires no anonymous sources, but I get anonymous information all of the time, and it's useful information that someone somewhere should have. I just don't have a place for it. So,
and a lot of people online, both blogging, Twitter, Facebook, to a lesser extent, they choose to remain anonymous because they want to be mean, they want to lie, they want to do all sorts of nasty things that they probably would not do if people knew who they actually were. But I never really saw that from Gidget Southway, did I?
No, I hope I wasn't an online troll. That was never my intention, and it was mostly to get some of that information out there that I didn't have another place to put. At the newspaper, I mean, this is just an example. I was working for at one point it was twice weekly, and then it was weekly. We only publish once a week. So if I learned something after our if I learned something after publication date, especially something national, like for example, that Mike Pompeo was considering running against Jerry Moran, that is definitely for a broader readership. I mean, people in Washington, D.C. are interested in that, but they might not find it on the Gardner News, and they might not find it on my blog, but it will get picked up, and it will get picked up first, and that's the other thing. I like to be first.
Yeah, sure. And I think since you've come out, so to speak, it's not even been 2 months, I don't think, but you really haven't changed your style, I think, on the Kansas GOP Insider. So
I have withheld some information that I probably otherwise would have published, and it's not because it's to protect the sources more than it's something I wouldn't say. It's if you know me at all and you kind of know who I run with, it's a pretty direct line of where I got some of this information, and those folks want to remain anonymous, and they can't. If everyone knows who I am, they can trace a pretty direct line to who gave me the information. So.
And you are a Republican and a conservative, not ashamed of that at all.
Well, Republican, I waver sometimes, but
so that's what I was going to say. That you sometimes level some pretty pointed, I don't want to say harsh, but pointed, and I think well-deserved criticism of Kansas Republicans.
Well, it's that's one of the things that's a little bit frustrating to me. I feel like conservatives and Republicans get a lot of bad attention, but it's bad attention from the left, and that works to pull politicians and public officials to the left. They're getting all this loud noise about how they did it wrong, but what they should have done is raise taxes or increase spending. If they were getting that same noise from the right, they may get the other idea, which is we should cut spending and cut taxes. So I want that noise from that direction, to pull them in that direction.
Besides your blog, you do also have a column in the Kansas City Star that runs, is it monthly, I think it is?
It's monthly.
And I know back in June, I think, well, you've had some recommendations for cutting spending, and maybe that schools already have enough money. And I know one from June, I mean, you were just really blistered in the comments on that, on the Kansas City Star.
Well, I don't actually read the comments usually.
Well, I don't blame you sometimes.
They're too mean, and if I read it will cause me to have a bad day. And I feel like they're mean. I mean, as you know, they're mean sometimes, and I've said my piece. I've made all my arguments. I'm done. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, and I don't blame you too. And I mean, columnists like down here on the Wichita Eagle, the opinion writers, Rhonda Holman and Philip Brownlee primarily. People they don't defend their positions in the comments on the Wichita Eagle either, and so I think they figured that I've made my case, and that's what I do too on Facebook. Sometimes I just make my case, and if people want to disagree with that and call me fat and stuff, and then sometimes I'll delete those, but normally I leave them there. Well, Danedri, hang on a moment. We're going to take a moment off for a commercial break. So this is Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Danedri Herbert, or some of you may know her as the blogger Gidget Southway. Now, from time to time, you've written about the grassroots conservatives and then what you've called the establishment of the Kansas Republican Party. Now, every time I think I finally got the difference figured out. Who are the grassroots? Who is the establishment? I immediately am overcome with self-doubt. So can you help us understand, not only me, but our viewers there, what's the difference between grassroots Republicans and the Kansas Republican establishment?
So I mean, I don't know. I don't know that it's well defined, but I would say the establishment are definitely elected officials. If anybody has been an elected official for longer than 2 terms, you can go ahead and call them the establishment. And there are some of them who maybe don't deserve to be painted with that brush, but ultimately they are. They're getting PAC money. They're getting all the benefits of incumbency, all the benefits of being a part of the party apparatus. Definitely we have a lot of really powerful PACs in Kansas. The KNRA, the KFL PAC. These are the political PACs that raise quite a bit of money and have quite a bit of influence. I'm not even saying they're wrong, but I'm saying they are very powerful. They've been there for a long time.
The teachers union has a lot of
Yes,
influence.
but I wouldn't call them the Republican establishment. They're the other establishment.
Much,
So those people, for sure, to me, the grassroots people are the precinct people, and most people have no idea who their precinct person is, if there is a precinct person,
and in most
how that
counties,
works.
in a lot of precincts, either one or both of the positions are empty.
Right. So those people, definitely. The people going to knock on doors, those are grassroots people. And then it gets a little tricky. There's some establishment people that I think are grassroots people, but they're people who donate up to $1,000 per cycle, not necessarily all on the same candidate, but it's cheap to be a political insider in Kansas. Pick 5 candidates and donate $200 every 2 years, so that's $1,000, and you are an insider. You have their ear, and you will get favors.
Yeah. Now, there are some exceptions. I mean, I'm thinking at the federal level that Tim Huelskamp, the congressman from the Kansas 1st District, has been in office for three terms.
I think so.
And he is definitely not the establishment. I mean, he's been kicked off by the establishment, although I think his opponent is trying to paint him as Washington establishment this year.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of media this way of Huelskamp? I mean,
Yes.
you're not that district, but it's
Right.
close enough that I'm sure.
Yeah, we do. I mean, Wichita TV is Western Kansas too, so yeah, we get all the Roger Marshall stuff and everything like that. And then there are some other exceptions, like you talked about door knockers, but I think you've seen the expose, a good piece of reporting by Brian Lowry of the Wichita Eagle, that governor's personal staff and the Senate president's students' personal staff are going out on taxpayer time, being paid by taxpayers to campaign for candidates.
Well, okay, so if they work for a politician, and by work I mean they get paid. They get paid by the governor's office. They get paid by the party itself or by the candidates. I think Jerry Moran has a huge ground game, but a whole lot of those people they're getting a paycheck.
Sure.
Those people are establishment. If you're getting a paycheck from the party or a candidate that is an incumbent, you are establishment. I'm sorry. But those folks, politicians always protect. I'm not excusing it. I'm saying politicians always protect themselves.
Sure.
And it frustrates me that you cannot tell me this wasn't happening when Sebelius was in office.
Sure.
It's all of a sudden an issue right now, but...
Well, at least Brian Lowry did report that Senator Anthony Hensley, the majority leader of the Kansas Senate, a Democrat, that he was doing the same type of thing. So, yeah, this has probably been going on for a very long time.
It's not excusable.
Right. Exactly. And, I was surprised to learn that the governor had 21 personal staff members, because a lot of us down in here feel that there's definitely a communications deficit coming from the governor's office, that he does this stuff but doesn't want to, is not able to explain why we need to do some of these things. And we just feel that the left have free reign to get their message out without much pushback from the governor.
Well, I think there's 2 problems. One, yes, the governor seems unwilling for whatever reason I get it, to talk to the media. What I don't understand is, why doesn't he come on your show? Why doesn't he go places where he's going to get a friendlier reception? Why doesn't he go on your show? Why doesn't he go on more...
He's called into Joseph Ashby a few times.
But why doesn't he make a point of that? Once a year the governor sits down with the Topeka Bureau reporters. No, he sits down one-on-one with them.
Okay.
And I don't understand it. Like, these people are out to, I hate to say it because I spent part of my career as a regular journalist, but most of the people covering Topeka, I don't think are even fair to. They're not even trying. They're not even trying. The governor sits down with them privately once a year at the end of the year when it's a slow news week, and those people need him then, and gives them one-on-ones. I don't understand why he does that. Like pick some people across the state that you know are going to give you a friendlier reception, and I don't even necessarily mean be on your side, but be fair to you and do those things. And I will tell you, as a reporter, as a former reporter, you need the officials to talk to you. And if they're giving the story to somebody else, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
That you can't get that same story, or you can't get. You don't have the access. The other thing is, the governor, from what I hear, doesn't talk much to the people in the party. He from what I hear, if you are a member of the Kansas legislature, if you're a Republican member of the Kansas legislature, you can't get in to talk to the governor. I would
think he could just walk right into the governor's office pretty much any time, and or at least his chief of staff or somebody high up. Like that.
Well, and maybe that's possible, but I think a lot of them, and I may be speaking out of turn because I'm speaking for other people, but they feel like they can't talk to him. He doesn't talk to them, and so and he leaves a lot of them he hangs them out to dry occasionally. So he's not talking to the right media. And he's not talking to the members of his caucus, so everybody gets to paint him however they want. Like he's a blank canvas, and unfortunately, they're painting him in a very ugly light.
Yeah, and we've had an illustration just last week or maybe the week before of how seductive the arguments of the left are for media. And this is, someone dug up a video of Dave Traubert, president of the Kansas Policy Institute, frequent guest on this show, from 2002, where as manager of a TV station in Wichita, he believed the arguments of the Kansas school spending establishment that we had to spend more money, that we had to have higher taxes. And to his credit, he eventually looked into this matter and found out that it was simply wrong. But I think that's just an illustration of how, everybody wants to be for the kids, everybody wants, et cetera, all the things that government purportedly does for us. But we just have to step back and really look at what's going on sometimes and realize that a lot of what's happening in government are just special interests run wild, and they don't have you and I as their primary thoughts. Danedri, hang on for a moment. When we get back from commercial break, you have some pretty strong feelings about the Kansas Supreme Court, and I'll ask you about that. I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm your host, Bob Weeks. With me here this week, Danedri Herbert, or as you may know her as Gidget Southway from the past. There's a lot of controversy over school spending in Kansas, and that leads to some angst in thinking about the Kansas Supreme Court. Right now, liberals and moderates in Kansas have a deep and reverent respect for the Kansas Supreme Court. They really love the Kansas Constitution, the separation of powers. They're buying into the whole high school civics package, which is kind of a myth in some respects. What do you think would happen, Danedri, when the Kansas Supreme Court eventually rules on the level of Kansas school spending? What we've just had was adjusting equity a little bit like that. You know what this is, don't you? That's an Arkansas PowerPoint. But we've had a ruling about equity, and even though that involved relatively small amounts of money, it was still a huge topic of conversation. There's going to be a ruling sometime about the adequacy. Is the overall level high enough? There's some thought that the Kansas Supreme Court may order huge amounts of additional spending. But what do you think would happen if the Kansas Supreme Court said, the level of spending is okay, or what if they even said it was too high?
I think the liberals and the so-called moderates would be backtracking quickly about just how wonderful the Kansas judicial system is. It's baffling, it's ridiculous, and it's frustrating to watch, because if it was going the other way, they would be screaming the same things, and It seems so hypocritical for them to pretend that the court is just this Like, they're not humans. The court, they're not humans. These are superhumans who don't have an opinion, and they're not politicizing anything, and that's not true. I mean, it's just not true.
Yeah, Stephen Ware of KU Law School has done some great research on, and I think everybody knows this, that judges make new law. I mean, court cases end up there because people don't think the law is clear on a meaning, so the Supreme Court has quite a bit of leeway in how to decide what the law actually means, and there's a limited government way to do that, or there's an expansive government way to do that.
Yeah, I would really like to see, it's not going to happen, but I would love to see the Supreme Court say on the question of well, it would have been better had they just tossed it out and said this isn't our place to say. That clearly my understanding, not a lawyer, my understanding is the legislature holds the purse strings. They decide what adequate is. That's their whole job, to determine what adequate is, not the courts. The court is parsing language,
Well, the Kansas Constitution says must make arrangements for suitable funding, and of course the court decides what the meaning of suitable is. And it's kind of frustrating because they say to the legislature, no, your plan is wrong, come up with another one, leaving the legislature to try to guess what the Supreme Court would or would not approve. It would be simpler, but not the right thing to do, perhaps, if they just came out with a figure that the legislature could even then agree with or not.
I think they're going to come up with a figure, and I think their figure is going to be $900 million.
Because the Kansas State Board of Education just this month or last month passed a resolution calling for that amount of money. It'll be interesting if that is part of their decision-making process.
I don't know how they can in good conscience say, well, who doesn't want more money? Like, if I got to just go to somebody and say, how much do you think you're worth? There's probably not enough money in the whole state. And so I don't understand even how anyone can think it's reasonable for the court to say, pony up $900 million more to make it suitable. First, where's that money going to come from? What are we going to cut? That's one thing. The educrats.
Or who are we going to tax more?
Well, it's probably going to be a combination of both, and it's still not going to be enough. The second you cut any kind of Medicaid or corrections or anything else, you are going to have the same people screaming about how we're not funding education suitably, screaming that now we're tossing grandmother over the cliff and making single mothers beg in the streets for food. Well, there's only so much money. I mean, there's only so much money, and unless we all start sending every penny we make to Kansas and they decide how much we get to keep in allowance, there's never going to be enough.
Yeah.
So,
what I'm really troubled about, too, is that all of this argument about public education in Kansas over the last couple decades almost, it's all about the spending pretty much. And so that provides an opportunity to ignore other problems such as the school choice issues and so forth like that. If the Supreme Court says you need to spend a lot more money, if the legislature and the governor do that, then everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people are going to say school problem is solved, yet that money is probably likely to have very little impact on the fortunes of Kansas school children.
Right. They're still going to be cranking out. Well, they don't even look at it. Like you said, they don't, whether or not the children are actually getting an education or how well they are being educated really isn't of concern. To me, it seems like, well, they have a nicer building.
Yeah.
And a nice building is fine and good, but that's, if I'm going in that building and learning nothing, what's the point of the pretty brick and mortar place? Yeah. It's pointless.
And we have an ongoing and continual gap in achievement between white students and minority students. I mean, it is huge. In Kansas, like on the National Assessment of Education Progress, young black children in grade 4, only 14% of them read at the proficient level according to NAEP scores. Now that's bad enough, but white students, it's like 45%. It's like 3 times as much. And I don't think that any amount of spending is going to really make much of a dent in that. And that's really, I think, a huge problem that we've got to deal with in Kansas. And those types of issues are really put aside by the argument over funding, I think.
It's I hate to say educrat greed, but it is. And actually, this is one area where conservatives maybe have an opportunity to go into some of those primarily black districts and areas of pockets of Kansas and say, hey, we want your kids better educated, and by giving you school choice, you don't have to send your kid to this school down the street that has terrible graduation rates and where no one's learning to read. You can take your kid to whatever school works for you and works for your student, and we're going to end up with better educated kids, and I think that's everyone's goal.
I think so too. And we just don't have school choice in Kansas. I mean, we have charter schools, but the local school districts have to give their approval. And as a result, there's very rarely charter schools except these online. There's a handful of those. We have a tax credit scholarship program, and there is a school in Wichita that's doing very well with that. But it's a very small amount of money, very small number of students. Yet to the education establishment in Kansas, that's going to be the death knell to Kansas public education.
Well, and when they went back, when the legislature, my understanding is when the legislature went back for that special session, that's actually what got cut. Was there's one provision that allows some, not exactly school choice, but a little bit of you can follow the money to some of these virtual schools, and that they cut the rate of increase to those to make up the difference in this equity. That's one of the things that got cut when they were trying to come up. Make our funding equitable. I guess those kids don't get equitability.
And as you and others have pointed out, a lot of this shuffling around of money that the legislature did in a special session, about half of that money is going towards lower property taxes rather than going to the schools.
Which I'm a fan of lower property taxes. However, it's so wrong to lie and mislead and suggest that we need to cut this over here so that they can so that kids are getting an equitable education. It's that old quote about socialism, that socialism is equalized misery, and that's just the truth. We just drag down one district so parents over here can get a property tax increase. I'm happy for them, but I don't think that's what most people thought they were going to get when they were screaming for more education funding.
I think that's right. Well, Danedri, we're out of time for today, so thanks very much for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV. It's been a pleasure. That's it again for another episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.